Hi, welcome to the H4RL Career Podcast. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dave.
And today we're going to continue our series that examines careers that make a difference. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about things that have to do with the brain injuries or diseases that might interfere with the communication of your brain with the rest of your body. So this might lead to paralysis or difficulty with speaking, different types of things like that. So some causes, things that might lead to someone having an issue like this, a neurological issue, would be a spinal cord injury, if they were maybe in a car accident or they were in the military, things like that can interfere with your spinal cord and then interrupt that communication. Also, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease can lead to some of this, or people who have had a stroke might have some of these issues. So we're going to talk today about some of the groundbreaking research that's being done to make some incredible progress and really give hope to these people that their lives can somewhat return to normal.
As well as careers that people are doing to address this problem. And also, some people might be even born with paralysis issues, and these type of technologies might affect, maybe we could offer solutions for them in the future as well. Now, we're only going to talk about one type of application because there's lots of people working on this problem and with different ways. But today we're going to talk about using a brain to computer interface to talk about that. Now, before we dive into that, please, if you find this information useful or informative or even just interesting, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe below if you're on YouTube, or 5-star ratings. It really does help us get this algorithm out there, help us get people to find us out there. Again, we're just trying to be found by this. So if you find this at all useful, please just do us a solid and just give us a thumbs up on this, all right?
We'd really appreciate it. And remember, if you find any of these careers interesting that we're talking about today, we have a career course at h4rl.com that's really helpful in determining whether or not those careers really would be a good fit for you, because finding something interesting is kind of the first step. And then there's a lot more to figuring out, will that career really be a good fit long term, and how do you become someone in that career, right? If it requires college, how do you pay for that? How do you pick the right one?
Yes.
All of that is covered in our career course. So make sure you check that out. There's a free trial, so you can go and see what's in there and get started.
Yep. All right, so let's dive into today. So we're going to talk about people who are trying to help people who are paralyzed get a little bit of freedom and functionality back in their life. So it's really kind of cool and kind of cutting edge stuff. This stuff has actually not been around very long, and there are people who are working on it. So again, like I said before, we're focusing on basically the brain to computer interface is what they call it, BCI way of solving this problem. There are other people working on more trying to fix the nerves and how to regrow nerves. We might touch on that later on, but today we're going to talk about this other aspect of it. All right, so it starts off with there's there's a lot of different groups working on this, but it's still not a real huge field yet. It kind of starts off with these people in Caltech, right? Caltech, California Institute of Technology, I think it is. So they first are working on trying to understand how the brain, kind of decoding the brain signals, right? So whenever you try to do something, your brain has to fire off neurons and signals and tells your muscles to go pick up a pen or something, pick up a cup of coffee and bring it to your mouth and drink it, right?
Right, because there are actual electrical signals in your brain.
Absolutely.
It's a combination of a chemical and electrical process.
So that they study these firings, right? They try to have these people say, okay, think of moving a cup, right? And they then put electrodes in the brain, actually in the brain, to monitor which neurons are firing. And they're trying to map out, how is the brain telling your different parts of your body to move? Because there are literally millions, if not billions, I think, of connections of neurons in your brain and how they fire. They kind of have it narrowed down so they know what parts of your brain do basically the main functions of your body. But still, there's a lot of mapping of neurons. It's not just one neuron that says, pick up that cup of coffee. There's a lot of ones that are firing, and you have to understand that code, right? So it's really complicated understanding, because we think about doing a lot of different things at the exact same time.
Right. It seems really simple, pick up the cup. But if you really think about everything involved, how many movements are really happening,
right,
it's actually quite complicated.
So what they've done is they've actually kind of gone in there. They actually, a combination of people like neurologists who kind of study the brain and study kind of degenerative diseases and stuff with the brain, are working with neurosurgeons who actually go in there and actually do the surgeries on the brain, who are also working with electrical engineers and computer scientists who are actually working on the computer side, trying to understand that what do all these like random firings, these signals are getting back. Because think about it, all they're going to measure is like these random firings in different parts of the brain. Then they got to kind of figure out and tell the computer what that means. That's really the tricky part. And then they got to make it do something else. So what they've done is they actually kind of put electrodes in the front cortex is what they said. Now, I'm not a neurologist, all right? I'm going to do my best. I'm sure I'm going to butcher some things, but I'm going to do my best. All this is coming from a article I found in Nature. Again, a very well established scientific article. If you've listened to some of our podcasts, you've heard me reference this before. So
scientific journal.
A scientific journal that's peer reviewed, so it's legit. So most of this is coming from one of those articles. Anyway, so they found this guy who actually got hurt go-karting. His go-karting and actually had severe, became paralyzed and severed his spinal cord. So he volunteered to, go through this because it's all experimental. They put electrodes down in his cortex, and they're actually to a specific type of neurons. And they actually were able to get to him to be able to move a mouse on a computer screen with his mind. Just thinking about moving his hand, it moved a mouse on the screen. And then eventually they were able to get him to do some things with Photoshop, like manipulate some pictures on Photoshop and do some clicking and to interface. Again, not moving his hands at all, just thinking about it. And the computer is reading what he's doing and doing it on the screen, which is pretty cool. And eventually he's able to play some of those shoot 'em up games is what he calls it, where he's just firing and shooting at people. So he's actually able to play video games by just thinking about it with his brain. So that's really a kind of amazing jump. They're able to actually get a person to just think about something and control a mouse on a computer screen.
Right. It's amazing enough when you see those things like where you move your hands and the robot hands move.
Right.
But if you didn't even move and you're just thinking it.
Right.
That's crazy.
So again, he has electrodes in his brain. So
right.
Major surgery to get that to happen. So that's not a great thing. So apparently he has this, what they call long-term BCI, long-term brain-to-computer interface in his brain. These permanent electrodes. There's only 35 people apparently in the U.S. that currently have this implanted in their brains. So it's a very small number of people that they're really starting to develop. Now, they're making great progress because there are like a couple different groups, mostly in universities. So this is more of a very much research area right now, but they eventually want to get it to commercial, and we'll talk about that at the end. But right now it's very much in the research phase, which is a great place to get into, by the way. If you're wanting to get into a technology, you want to get into it at the beginning of it all. So again, if this all sounds interesting to you, it's a great spot for you to get in with your career. All right, so it's at the very beginning phases of its development. All right, so there's people in Brown University. They're over on the East Coast, another big time university. They had decided to try to use machine learning to take the next step. Okay, you have all these random firings. How do I make sense of it? Because it's really hard for us to map all this. So
machine learning meaning AI.
AI, artificial intelligence. So what they do is they map a lot of people's brains and they have them think about doing different things, like moving your hand, like move your hand out, move it in, move your finger, pick up a cup of coffee, pick up a pen, tons of different things. And they're trying to just record all the different signals in their brain. And then they're going to feed it into machine learning and artificial intelligence, tries to map and figure out the patterns in there that they can key on and measure in the future. So using this technique, they were actually able to take it another step forward. Let's see here. Then other people took this information, like the machine learning and mapping, like people in Case Western. They're now going to be able to take some of that same mapping and now make it prosthetic for people's arms and hands. And now instead of using a robotic arm to pick something up, they're actually able to fire certain fingers, like the contract the people's muscles using like electricity, because that's actually how you contract your muscles and extend it. Is like a little electrical signal goes in there and kind of moves your muscle in and out. Well, that's what they're doing. They're kind of exciting the muscles with electricity based off the signals they're measuring from their brain. And they got a person to actually be able to pick up a cup of coffee, bring it to their mouth, and drink it. Guy was paralyzed, but by bypassing the spinal cord, they measure the signals, goes to the computer. The computer then tells this apparatus attached to his arms how to pick up a cup of coffee and bring it to his brain. Now he has to think about that every step. Like thinking about literally physically what it takes to move. Not just like I want to pick up a cup of coffee. It's like yes, exactly, step by step. Like move hand, close fingers, move hand. It's like that kind of steps he has to think about in order to bring the cup to his mouth and drink it.
So what you're talking about right now is something almost like a robotic glove sort of thing, right? He's got his own hand, but then there's something else overlaid that's doing moving it. So it's not just using a robotic arm. So that's kind of what they're focusing on. Then the University of Pittsburgh researchers are taking the next step further.
One problem is there's no feedback, right? He can't tell. He's telling his brain to do so. He's visually looking at it, but he has no way to know. We have the sense of touch. You can kind of feel that cup, right? When you grab it. Well, right now they don't have that feedback. So that's what the University of Pittsburgh is doing. They actually put pressure sensors in like a robotic arm, not the glove, but a robotic arm. And they put electrodes in part of the brain. I think it's called, let me get this right, somatosensory cortex. All right, somatosensory cortex. I guess that's where your sensory feedback gets in your brain, I guess. So basically, when he touched it and the pressure pads, felt the cup, it sent signals into his brain. And at that point, he said it wasn't like we feel like today. He actually said it felt like either like a pressure being applied to him or being prodded or even a buzzing sensation. So it's not the same because guess what? They haven't quite figured out exactly where the right neurons are in your brain that gives you the sense of touch. So that's another area they really have to explore is like what are the right points in your brain to contact because it's very complicated. But at least he got some kind of sensation.
Right.
When the robot grabbed it.
Fascinating, but so strange.
Yes, but so when he grabbed it, it felt like he's getting buzzed or he's getting prodded a little bit. But at least he had some kind of feedback that he actually grabbed something with a robotic arm, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, right? So then the people in Caltech, another set of researchers than what we talked about before, because there's different groups working on this, they was looking at, okay, let's not put it in the part of the brain that's controlled each like finger muscle, right, or hand muscle, because that's where they have to think step by step. That's really hard and complicated and actually makes it kind of jittery because it's really kind of hard to distinguish the different signals. There's another part of the brain called the posterior parietal cortex, PPC. Apparently, this is the part of the brain that has your intent. Like, I want to pick up that cup of coffee, all right? Not that the step-by-step motions, that's a different part of the brain, but the desire part, like, I want to do that. Apparently, that signal stays with you the entire time you're doing something because you have that desire to pick it up. So the entire time you're picking that cup of coffee up to your mouth and drinking it, that part of your brain is firing.
So it's kind of like the activator and overarching control for the entire movement.
Exactly. I think it's a little bit deeper in the brain, so it's a little bit harder to get to, so it's a little bit concerning. But they went into that part and tapped into it. But apparently the signals are a little bit cleaner in that part of the brain because they're more long-term of a full function and it's more distinctive of what you're trying to do. And with that, they actually made great progress. It was easier. The person just got to think, I wanted to pick up the cup of coffee. And they're able to use a robotic arm, not their hand in this case, to pick up the cup of coffee without having to think of every step-by-step motion, and it wasn't so jittery. So that was a great improvement in and of itself. So that's what they're getting with like the motion, right? There's still a long ways to go to really decode the brain, all the different functions of it, figure out what parts of the brain to get signals back to think about it. If you have really millions, if not billions of connections in there, that's really complicated to decode, and there's a lot of work to be done, as well as additional prosthetics to make things actually usable for humans or maybe robotic arms, right? Now people are moving on to what about people who have like speech impairment, right? That can come from a stroke. Strokes can cause that to happen. ALS can eventually cause that to happen. And so the people can't really speak anymore. They're kind of trapped in their bodies. They can't really communicate. That would be so hard. It's so hard. So the University of California in San Francisco first developed this process of, again, tapping into the brain, same type of things, electrodes in the brain, to have a person to think about moving a mouse on the screen and grabbing or clicking that letter. And they could do that. And very slowly, they could kind of go through the different letters on the screen and kind of click, and spell out words.
With their brain.
Okay. So that's the first way they can kind of start to get someone to start to communicate on a screen to spell things out. So then some other people at the Stanford took that a little bit further and worked and basically developed a process that basically instead of having like move a mouse and click on something, let's think about handwriting. They actually realized apparently handwriting, when you think about handwriting, I know it says there's actually used for handwriting anymore. Here's a point in case you become paralyzed. Hopefully not. This is a good example of it because apparently when you think about writing each letter in handwriting, that's a very distinctive signal in your brain, apparently. So each letter is kind of a distinctive signal in your brain. Besides...
Now, are you talking about just cursive or anything you're doing like writing it? So print or cursive?
I didn't distinguish. One of the two. They said handwriting. So
writing with your hand.
Writing hand. So if you're thinking about each letter like you're writing it, it makes it, because think about it, in order to write that letter, you would have to fire a certain type of motion in your hand. So they're thinking about how it's mapping each one of the signals in your hand to make that letter. All right. So then they're able to get to print that on the screen. The only thing is a couple letters, apparently like an R and an S and an N, I think it was, are very similar firings in your brain. So it didn't get those letters really that great. But then they combined that with a autocorrect software like you have on your cell phone that corrects texting sometimes, and they got to be 99% correct.
Wow.
When they're just thinking about writing something, and they're able to get like 45 words. The point and grab one was like 45, I think, characters a minute. With this new approach, by doing handwriting, they got to 90 characters per minute.
Wow.
So that's crazy. So yeah, they can actually kind of decently communicate now. But this thing about handwriting different letters, it can kind of, print it out on a screen, and they can communicate. Then some other people. See, I told you lots of people work on this. They start looking at like, okay, that's handwriting. That's great. Let's talk about actually speech. So apparently there's like 50 phonemes in the English language. I guess individual sounds and phonemes that make up our language. So different sounds that come together. And each one of those has in a certain part of the brain, I forget what it's called, but there's a different part of the cortex that is responsible for speech. They tap into that. And think about when you make a sound, you have to move your tongue, you have to move your lips and other muscles. Well, those are distinct movements. So distinct firings inside your brain. So they look at that, and they actually were able to make for this person who basically was trapped, who could not communicate, who had a brain stroke, who couldn't do anything, 50 words. They could actually make a vocabulary of 50 words of different firings that they could recognize and put together for him. And he was able to basically kind of think about saying words, and he could kind of print it out up to 15 words a minute. Not as fast as the handwriting, but still you're thinking more so that's writing something. You're thinking about saying these syllables, and it's kind of coming out, and eventually you could put that into a computer so they could actually start, talk it out if you wanted to. So in a way, they're starting to help people actually who could not communicate actually talk.
So they can actually then think in words rather than picturing every letter.
Exactly, right.
That spells them.
That's not as fast, but they're still getting there, right? Because it's still kind of hard to decoding all these signals is one of the biggest issues, and then measuring that and trying to make it non-invasive. Because this last way with the phonemes, I believe they just put like a mapping. They actually put probes directly down into the brain. They kind of put like a more like look at the overall like activity of the brain, so it's less invasive. So that's the other thing, because no one wants to have to force people to put a bunch of probes in their brain, right?
Right. Brain surgery is scary.
It's very scary. So they want to put more of a mapping around there. So really, that's like the big thing. So I'm trying to see if there's any other movements. Oh, one other kind of accomplishment. So that was all, for some reason, strokes and people who could do it. But for some reason, there was a person who had ALS, right? And he could only communicate by moving his eyes. Like he could move his eyes certain ways and could kind of communicate that way. So they worked with the University of Tübingen. I hope I don't mispronounce that, in Germany. Same people from, I believe it's Stanford, worked with these people in Tübingen. The family gave them the right, because the guy can't communicate really, to basically put electrodes in his brain.
Right. That would be really tough. If these people can't communicate, there would have to be other people making the decision of whether or not they want to go forward with this experimental technology.
Exactly. So basically they did. They put the electrodes in there.
They've had a lot of tough decisions.
But apparently with this technology that they're doing, they couldn't really do the same type of phonemes and stuff like that because of his condition for some reason. Phonemes. So what they did is the number of firings of the neurons in his brain. They taught him somehow to lower his, maybe by meditating, I don't know, to lower the number of neurons, and one to excite the number of neurons firing. And the higher the numbers firing was a yes, and the lower was a no. And using this technique in a screen, he's able to select different letters. And he's able to do something like, I don't know, like 15 characters a minute, or like 1 character a minute, which is super slow, but he before couldn't really communicate at all. So
character as in a letter?
As in a letter. So it's a very slow way of doing it, but it is a way for him who had no real way of communicating besides moving his eyes to have some kind of communication with the outside world.
Right.
Which is huge. And if you talk to anybody that's paralyzed, the biggest thing they want is more independence, because they're so dependent on everybody. And that's what they're trying to do. Some independence is better than nothing. Now, before we get into the careers that all work on this, it gives you a minute to pause. If you aren't paralyzed, how amazingly blessed we are, by the way, because we take the little things for granted, like the ability to actually just get up and walk on your own, all right, or pick up a cup of coffee or any kind of drink and drink it without having to think of every single step in the process to do it.
Or to tell someone what we need or how we feel.
Absolutely. So we really do take a lot of things for granted. But, okay, so that is, by the way, where the state of the current research is at. A lot of great things are happening. A lot of people really making, but it's all on the university level in small sample sets. So where they need to go in the future, which is a great opportunity for you, if this all sounds interesting to you.
Cutting edge.
Cutting edge.
Just to clarify real quick, because you've said university level, this research is happening at universities. Just in case people aren't familiar with how that works, does that mean I have to be a university student to work on this, or I have to be a professor, and so then I can't work on it after I graduate unless I'm a professor?
No. I mean, eventually they all want to transition it to commercial world, right? They actually want to make this more accessible. But what I mean by university, it is absolutely right now PhD level. Like these are professors working in universities who are getting like grants from the government or different organizations. Actually, Elon Musk is trying to start up a company called Neuralink to kind of help work with this brain to computer interface. Elon Musk owns Tesla. He's actually the richest man in the world. So, he has money. He likes to invest in different type of technologies. Well, he's trying to develop a commercial company for this brain to computer interface. But mostly it's like professors and their graduate students all working on this research. That's what I mean. University means it's still very cutting edge. It's very like early on science. It's not at all out in industry or out in the commercial world where you can go buy it and actually do it on a regular basis. You get to, like you said, it's experimental. All these people doing it, they don't know if it's going to work or not. They have to sign all these forms saying, we're going to try not to hurt you, but this might hurt you.
So if I'm interested in working in this, I'm probably going to be getting an undergrad in a scientific field, and we'll talk about more specifically what those would be.
Yep.
But then most likely you'd be able to begin working on this as a graduate student. Paired with a professor.
Yes, who's working in that field.
Right.
You got to find the right professor working in this field.
So you could work on this throughout your graduate studies. And then when you graduate, there's something called a postdoc, where you can come back and continue working at a university, but you're not a professor yet.
Right.
And so you could continue researching that way.
Right.
And then you can also
you eventually become your own professor, by the way, once you get past your postdoc and work. And that could be your focus, your area of focus, and some university. And then you have students
working with you.
Yeah. And
you can apply for scientific grants, or in this case, maybe medical institutions that are giving grants to fund this research.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to make sure that people understood.
Yes. So
where this is happening, how you'd get into it.
This isn't something you're just going to go out of high school to do, by the way. This isn't something you're even going to do right a bachelor's degree as far as like off on your own. You're not going to go work at a company that's doing this right now because no one's really doing this besides maybe the universities, and this is a very select few. But like it's a great way for you, by the way, if you want to become a professor and do some really meaningful work. It's a cutting edge area. There's not a lot of people in it yet. And that's where you want to be as a professor. Universities
will be interested in keeping you on.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be seeking you out because they want to get into this type of field. So that's the great thing about this.
And it sounds like corporate opportunities will be opening up.
Absolutely. Everybody wants to transition this eventually to, at the first step is just make it more readily available in hospitals, right? And then eventually they want to make it more broadly available. And some people have visions even like maybe you could prescribe something. Now, to get there, the hurdles are that they have to overcome is they have to test this on a lot more people. Right now, only 35 people have had this done. So a lot more people have to be tested and shown that it works. So that's the first thing. It's a lot more testing, and that's just going to have to expand, right? 2, they have to map the brain a whole lot better. A lot more things they have to figure out about the brain. So there's tons of work from a neurologist standpoint, a neuroscientist standpoint, just understanding how to decode all this. And that's also machine learning, by the way. So learning to take all these signals and mapping them into machine learning and figuring out what all these firings mean and build a very stable case and understanding what parts of the brain you want to tap into to give the sensory feedback, right? And the speech and how to get that to work correctly. Then they have to figure out less or not as invasive, not as serious surgeries to be able to measure that stuff. Ideally, they all will be able to measure it from the outside of the brain without having to go into the brain. That's a huge step that's not been done yet. So figuring that part out, how do you measure these signals without having to go into the brain? That's a basic science and engineering you got to do right there. So that's another step that has to happen. Then you got to figure out the prosthetics. Like if you're going to try to make the arm move, how do you actually make that, like those interfaces to the hands and the legs, so one that can be supportive and also maybe actually fire and maybe be useful? That's going to be your like biomedical engineers, your mechanical engineers, your prostheticists, right? And the other people are going to be your computer scientists and your machine learning people and electrical engineers figuring out all the decoding and the signal work, right? And then you get your neurologists understanding the mapping of the brain, and the neurosurgeons who also help mapping the brain, but also doing the initial implementation of a lot of these things into the brain. So those are all the major careers that are in focus with this. And eventually, if this becomes mainstream down the road, you would have physical therapists who would have to learn how to interface with these prosthetics and teach people how to use them. Right, and get them to work with them to be able to use them effectively, because it's not going to happen. It's not like you just put it on; it's going to work perfectly. I guarantee you, they're going to have to learn how to work with these new devices. So that's all going to be physical therapists in the future. So
all of these will be very rewarding careers for
sure. Absolutely.
A lot of them right now, though, are gonna focus on problem-solving skills, and really, it sounds like a lot of persistence.
Yes.
Because this is going to be kind of a long process.
Oh, it definitely is. And I actually said every single person they interviewed who had this happen, they said it's incredibly frustrating. When we talk about them doing this, it's not like they strap this on and they just pick up a cup of coffee. They're talking about like they tell them to do something and the machine glitches and goes somewhere else because, they didn't decode it right? So they have to figure, that really meant this, right? So they go back and try it again. And it took hours and hours and days sometimes to get this thing to actually move and for them to control it correctly. Very slow, and it's a whole team of engineers and scientists with this one guy or girl sitting trying to get them to do this. So it's not like, people don't understand about science. When you're doing something cutting edge like this, it's not like you just strap it on, even if you design it right and it works the first time. It takes a long time and teams of people to make it work.
You'd also have to have some compassion to be able, because it's all focused on this person who has allowed you to enter their brain, and they're trying so hard, and so you'd have to realize it's not pure science. You're not just working with
Absolutely
a computer.
Not.
You've got a person who's been through a lot, who's still going through a lot,
and not frustrating.
So you're depending on.
You keep asking,
keep trying.
Pick up the cup and it doesn't. Pick up the cup and it doesn't. Pick up the cup and it doesn't. It's tiring. Absolutely, a ton of compassion and working with human patients and stuff like that is completely different than just designing a piece of hardware.
Yeah, so kind of a combination of those things.
So anyway, I found this interesting. It's a little bit different than obviously the energy. Right, it's fascinating, emerging. Again, we're trying to, in this series, we want to talk to you about careers that really make an impact in people's lives and in the world. And this absolutely does. We want to talk about careers that are more like that have a big future and are more the cutting edge. Because again, that's a great point to get into is at the beginning of these type of things. So that's why we're looking at more futuristic type of jobs. But again, we're trying to inspire you.
Yeah, we don't want to give you a job like, hey, guess what they already did?
Right, exactly.
Well, they're kind of done.
So yeah, so there's lots of problems to be solved, which is where you want to be, by the way, in the science field. You want to be the problem where they're trying to, there's lots of problems to be solved.
You don't want to be the problem. You want to be the solution.
Exactly. So that's basically, we have, by the way, the list on our YouTube site. If you're listening to this on any one of the podcast
Right, you
stations.
rattled off some careers. Are you talking about majors that go along with those?
No, I was just talking about the career. So again, great way, by the way, to get into our career exploration course. If you want to try to find the majors that go along with this, come. By the way, we'll help you figure out which one of these particular areas might be the best suit for you. Because, there's a lot of different ones we just talked about and different levels of education and different levels of, rigor to get into them. Maybe you want to kind of jump into our career exploration course and figure out which one might be the right fit for you. So come.
Right. We have a quiz in there that helps you figure out your work values, which ones are highest for you. And that's something that's really going to differ in the different careers that we've talked about. So they're all contributing to making these amazing discoveries, but you might find that one of them is more satisfying for you. You like the work environment, you like the kind of demands that it has, much better than others. And so those are the sorts of things we help you figure out in our course.
So come join us at h4rl.com. If you have, again, questions or would like us to look at the other type of problems or different types of careers, come leave us a message at h4r.com. Go to the contact page or leave a message in YouTube below, the YouTube. And again, please, if you find this interesting at all and you would like other people to hear about it, tell them about it and then also give us a 5-star rating, or give us a thumbs up, or subscribe, or hit the bell below.
Tell a friend.
Yeah, tell a friend. All that would help us out. Anyway, until next time, I'm Dave.
And Jill, thanks so much.